Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to RocPy. I can't see all of you all at once unless I go into grid mode, I suppose, but 13 or so, well, 12, excluding me and maybe George. Thank you for showing up tonight for this mostly impromptu discussion on web APIs. Very, very shallow introduction to it. But RocPy is Rochester's only, as far as I still know, Python users group. Now I'm missing some fonts on my slide, so everything looks kind of wacky on the right-hand side. But nonetheless, we're not just about the organizers, we're about you guys. You guys make up the group. And whether we're here virtually or in person, we're very thankful to have a group of people who show up for a variety of topics and contribute not only to talk, but also contribute from the audience. And we do have our core organizers and various amounts of participation, and that's a slight against myself a little bit. Josh does probably the lion's share of all of this, so thank you, Josh, for everything you do for the group. Dave is there in spirit on a boat somewhere, I'm sure. I don't know where Emily is, and I'm Rich, by the way, if you haven't guessed by my Zoom label. I think that's all we have. I don't know if Remy is still on that list or not. It's pushed off the slide. But we have tons of meetup people. I don't know what the number is. I gave up counting years ago. It's probably like 1,000 people, but you can't expect everybody to show up even virtually. But our mission is to promote, protect, and advance, and to support and facilitate the growth of a local community of Python programmers. And that local part is where the emphasis is, because as George was pointing out about software engineering salaries, that survey is all about sort of that local group support. We need to be there to help us understand where we're supposed to be, where we have come from, where we're going, and just that interaction with each other is very healthy. I don't know why I mentioned these. I think Meetup is the only thing here we're really using. We have a website. I haven't been in IRC in ages, and GitHub is sparsely used.
Oh, we can actually add YouTube into that. That's been more active recently than the rest of those.
That's a great idea. That's a great point. YouTube. Add YouTube to that. Of course, we're always looking for help. It doesn't have to be a permanent position as an organizer for the group, although that wouldn't be a bad idea. But people who are willing to give talks. There are people from a variety of different backgrounds and experiences, whether they're hobbyists or professionals. We'd love to hear what you have to say and what you can teach us. Even if you think it's old hat for you, something you've done every day and it's just kind of boring to you, it could be quite exciting for the rest of us. So don't discount it unless you bring it up with us first. I have no idea what happened last time at RocPy, so I've been very spotty with this. So last time was a great talk at RocPy, and but this tonight will be maybe something a little less exciting. So I'm going to talk about web APIs. Try to create APIs with Python. And before I even do that, let's talk about what sort of methodologies are involved with that. If you want to help or just contact us or ask questions, whatever, these two primary mechanisms are available. You can email us at org@rockpy.org or visit our website. There's a contact form there that should still work. I haven't checked it in a while. At rockpy.org/contact. Folks have any questions before we continue? Excellent. Okay. Get this out of the way. There's the Rock Dev compensation survey George was talking about. So we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so I am not an expert in all things API, although now it is my primary job to deal with such things. And what I have learned over the years on my own and will be learning going forward in my professional career, I hope to come back with and, maybe on this talk and give you something. Web APIs. So we're going to talk a little bit about the software tooling, the things that you use. We'll keep it simple. There are so many ways you can set this up. We're just going to pick a couple Python tools and go from there. We're going to talk about general API information, like what is an API? Why do they exist? What's the benefit? Stuff like that. We're going to implement an API, some sort of contrived example involving books. Actually, even before that, we're going to try to access an API from somebody with a well-defined one, NASA. And then we'll implement our own of something very boring involving books. And if we have any time left, I have some other examples using Flask. I think it's Flask RESTful, the module. So we're actually going to implement this without using any external modules for Flask. But we can do this with something that is geared directly for building good APIs in Flask. It's an external third-party extension. So, web APIs. They are exposed, they're tools, exposed interfaces for making information and application functionality accessible over the internet. So in this lesson, or whatever you want to call it, we're going to learn what an API is, how to build one, and some of the good principles involved. We're not going to do anything that involves a database, that we could, but I'm not going to. So let's set up, what are we going to play around with? So I'm a Mac user and Linux user. This is going to be focused from a Mac perspective. Shouldn't be much different for a Linux user. And Windows, I always know, has its edge cases. We're going to use Python 3.x. I don't know what's on this machine. I think it's 3.7 or 8. And that's fine. We're going to use the Flask web framework. And we can use API testing tools like curl, Postman. There's a variety of other ones on the Mac. You can just use the web dev tools built into your web browser if you wanted. You could use those. That's fine too. But in our particular case, oh, what happened here? Something got moved. So in our particular case, though, we're going to write a Python program to actually access these web APIs rather than look at them in a raw form. Let me fix this. What are we doing here? Oh, that's supposed to be below. That's why. So 3.9 came out not too long ago. I don't know. I want to say like a week or two ago or something like that. Not sure exactly how recent. And it's a little problematic going bleeding edge these days, so I probably shouldn't upgrade this particular machine to 3.9. Regardless of what version you're using, I do highly suggest you do some sort of compartmentalization of virtual environment that's built into Python now using the venv module, which you can look up at that link. I use virtual env wrapper, and I will probably be moving off to poetry at some point. I really can't speak well about, I can speak well about it because some people have told me how good it is. Pardon me. But I can't speak with any particular knowledge or experience quite yet. I've just casually used it, and it looks like a pretty neat tool for dependency management for projects. Wow, this thing's moved all over the place. Okay, so pip install Flask is what we're going to do first. Well, no, first we're going to do our virtual environment. Now I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to use, well, actually, what the hell do I have on here? I hope it's virtual env wrapper. Let's find out. So these little zoom windows get in my way, and they never seem to have a nice place to hang out. Okay, get you out of the way. If you can't see anything clearly, and just let me know. Sometimes my terminal colors may be a little weird. Okay, so let's see the. Do I have? Yes, excellent. We'll call this API. Oh.
Sorry about being late.
I think somebody needs to mute their microphone. There's a bit of a hum. Let's upgrade that. Not make virtual env, geez. So I probably had this installed when I had 3.7 on here and haven't fixed it since I went to 8. So we'll just quickly reinstall it. But virtual env wrapper is a wrapper, as the name implies, around another module called virtual env. And not knowing exactly how that's built, but it certainly hooks into the virtual environment components of Python. Makes it quite easy. at least the wrapper package to make virtual environments. Make virtual app API. Basic argument goes through and builds. Pardon me.
Richard, you're entirely inside of Windows, inside that little command line.
Say that again.
You're entirely inside of Windows, inside that little command line window.
I'm inside of Windows.
You're running Windows inside that CMD.
I don't know what you mean by that. I'm sorry. I have a terminal open. You see my terminal window, right?
Yeah. And the OS in that terminal window is?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, I think you're asking if it's Linux or Windows, or it's Linux, right?
Mac.
It's Mac. Well, it's Mac. I mean, it's
no. This say Mac. It's the OS that's at it. I for a lot of my Windows, I can run different OSs on the other side of it. So, if I usually may ask the question, what's the OS running behind the window?
Oh, this is on a Mac. I said I'm doing all this on a Mac today.
Okay. No, that's about all I need. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Adam, hey, good to see you pop up.
Hey, good to see
you. So while this is a Mac, the terminal is, for all intents and purposes, Unix or Unix-like. I forget if Apple's Unix.
BSD derivative.
Yeah, it's a BSD derivative, but I don't know if they have the Unix certification anymore. They did at one point, but they're pretty much considered Unix.
Just say Mac. It's fine for Mac OS. It's fine for now.
That's fine. I'm speaking to everybody else, though, not just you, whoever else is in the group. So once we make our virtual environment, we have are activated. My little prompt here is showing that. And I can go ahead and pip, I usually say pip3 install and Flask. It's the first way to start. It goes through the process, and there we go. Okay. So now we'll stop there for a minute and just talk about what we're going to do and why. Now, Flask is pretty simple comparatively to other things we could using. Like I loathe using JavaScript in any form. Django's great, but it's too big for this project. But regardless, whatever form and whatever platform you implement a web API in, or a web application programming interface, it is a way to communicate between different components. They could be two internet-facing components. Well, they're all internet-facing, but like two servers, for example, if they need to talk to each other. Maybe it's a client like your web browser talking to another web server somewhere, or whatever. You can build this in any number of different arrangements. The idea is simple. You have one side that is exposing a well-defined interface that isn't simply a web page with HTML, but rather using the URL styling of addressing and resource selection, right? Any URL you go to, you can tell a web server you would like to access a resource in a very clear and defined procedural way. And then you get in return some data regarding that. Now, depending on the type of APIs you use, like I don't know anything about SOAP, for example. Like I am only familiar with REST. That seems to be the nicest one for me to use. And JSON, like I kind of loathe XML, but sometimes you have to use it. But most of the time I avoid it. So I'm using JSON and the REST style of web APIs. So no matter what, you're going to have some defined technologies behind it, a methodology. In this case, REST and JSON. Now, if you know what an API is otherwise, most people know APIs from basic desktop level programming, where you have different languages that need to access extensions to whatever code you're currently writing. So in this particular case, it would be, a Python module being imported, and then you can read about the help. That's your API, I guess. You can see what that's all about. Read about the class and the methods in it. Or more traditionally, like a C header file. And then that would expose the API for whatever library you intend to use, a binary library that you would link against. But we have none of that here. But the idea is not too different. You're given a well-defined interface in either of these scenarios, and you can program against it. Now, why would you want to make an API to a web service? Well, you might have a large data set that might make downloading data impractical for every person who wants to visit your website. And who knows what your website is doing? Maybe you're serving, weather data or research data, or maybe a large database of movies like IMDb or something like that. So regardless, it may be impractical just to download it all for both the provider of the data and also for the consumer of it. And you might also want real-time access to data for a tight integration into whatever application you might be developing. So whether you're developing a web app of your own or a desktop app, like I'll show you, a very basic Python app, you can integrate your code with some external service and get data into it that way. Or maybe your data set's updated frequently, tying in with our first bullet point, making downloading impractical. So if your data is going to update a lot, then what's the point? Just access it, on the remote end through their API. Or you just really need to access small bits of data. This is all sort of variations of a theme. And you can also sort through the data through good, maybe relational queries or other types of query languages to pull out the data you need, rather than just a data dump, maybe as a CSV or a giant JSON blob or something like that. Also, you might have collaborative work. Maybe you're having multiple people who are not just consuming the data, but also changing it. So users may perform actions that add, update, or delete data from that set. And also, it lets you maintain control. So you can maybe prevent people from downloading all your data, put limits on the API, or you restrict what types of data they can access within that. So controls are probably one that most people may not consider off the bat, because I think that's a really good one. So, and plus, it's a practical way to distribute your application data and functionality to the world. Now, a few other terminologies along the way, and do feel free to interrupt any questions as we go along. And I see a chat. I don't know if that's relevant to me or not. George, oh yeah, it's just the survey. So we're going to be using HTTP. Not in any glorified low-level way. We don't have the time or the attention span, I think, for that, unfortunately. That's a lot of deep dive. But the hypertext transfer protocol, the language of the web, the protocol of the web, has been around for ages. And this is the primary way of you communicating with a web browser to a web server. But it is also the way that almost, I don't want to say all, but the majority of modern web APIs are based on HTTP. Particularly REST APIs. They don't have to be. There are other protocols, other ways of doing things, but this is one very, very popular way. And HTTP is a collection of different methods. So in addition to a well-defined protocol, it has actions you can do in that protocol, such as get a resource, or post, which is pushes data to the server to a particular resource. And there are a variety of other methods that are not obvious. There's a delete, there's patch, there's put, and so forth. Some are lesser known to most people, including myself, but some involve like web dev and other things like that. But we have enough verbs here in the HTTP terminology that we can go into a discussion shortly about why REST is a good idea. Now, a URL is a uniform resource locator. I think everybody here has heard URL, and that's probably no surprise. But that's what it stands for, and involves at least three main parts. There are more, but three is, so the first would be a protocol, HTTP, HTTPS, the domain, where you're connecting to, and then right after the server name, what resource are you accessing? Right? You go to the server, what are you going to get? Well, in this case, maybe you want to go to the contact page. So that is a basic breakdown of a URL. So it defines a specific resource, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you may have heard of URI. Just a quick thing, if you want to know what a URI is. it's just an overarching categorization in this little Venn diagram here. And URL is a subset of that. So not to get too complicated, but basically graphically, this is what, if I say URI, I suppose it's just as correct as saying URL. I don't know if I want to have that argument, probably is, but URL and URI could be probably considered the same thing by most people. We'll also be using JSON. It's a text-based, declarative, lightweight data interchange format. It is used by, obviously, JavaScript and pretty much every other language that I know of that does anything with the web. It's probably the de facto lightweight. Maybe I shouldn't say that because I don't know how expansive XML is in terms of its popularity. But a lot of people like JSON, myself included. No, okay, slide says here JSON is generally the most common, XML being the second most common, so that's a guess, but we'll see. But we're definitely going to focus on JSON. And the benefit of JSON is that it almost translates, some cases, perfectly to Python. I mean, you can load it up from a string, and it's translated quite well from literal syntax to a Python object. And then finally, REST, representational state transfer. It is a philosophy of web access that describes some of the best practices of implementing APIs on the web. And there's a couple websites here that can go into in more detail. All right, but the general gist is that through a clear hierarchical categorization of your URLs, like collections and specific singular resources, maybe ID numbers for a particular resource, you basically have nouns that describe objects in some fashion in a URL. And then the actions you'll perform on them are not described in the URL itself. Nowhere in the URL should you see put or get or delete. All those actions in the REST methodology are done through the HTTP protocol, the verbs, the actions the protocol supports. And we'll go through that later on. So my first example is not implementing an API for ourselves, but rather let's interact with an API that's already existing, that's easy to use, and it's quite nice to look at. And that would be this astronomy picture of the day. So using NASA's well-defined web APIs, and they have tons of them for all their data, the benefits of government work, I suppose. We can query NASA, in this particular case, for an astronomy picture for some random year. I think they started this around 1997. So they have a website, api.nasa.gov, and I'll show you some sample code from a Jupyter notebook in a minute. But let's start with api.nasa.gov. So at the official API webpage for NASA, you can apply for an API key. And what that does, it puts you in their database as a person, as a user of their resources, and can also keep track of your resource consumption and whatever things that need to happen with that. So you'll have to officially sign up. What they do give you, and which is what I'll end up using today, is their demo key. So their API key, they provide one for free that people can use, and there's no pay, but this one's just go ahead and use it. But it's severely restricted because a lot of people are going to share it, and there's already resource restrictions on it. But it's at least per IP address per hour. So I could probably easily exceed this if I make a mistake in my script by making more than 30 requests in an hour. I may have already exceeded my daily limit, to be honest, but we'll see. Now, the rest of this doesn't matter, but you can read through this on your own. But if you browse their APIs, you can see that NASA has a lot of external interfaces to program, if you want to program against them to get whatever stuff you need, full of data. NeoWise, Near Earth Object Web Service, folks at the U of R that I used to work with, that's what they were working on. APOD is popular. Exoplanets, a friend of mine is in the Exoplanet group in Pasadena. NASA's Image and Video Library, all this other stuff. And it's cool. You can do whatever you need there. Yeah, that's where it takes us. But let's focus on what the APOD API looks like. So here, you can see an example image. If you go to apod.nasa.gov, I believe, you can, oh, here it is. You can just see, it's just a web page. There's nothing about this that lends itself to be easily programmed against, right? It is not an API. It's a website. It's visual. So now you have a question. How do we make this something we can program against? Well, here's the get. HTTP has that get verb. You want to get a resource, and you can tell it go to this particular URL. And then you get in return something. Now, what do you provide it to tell it what to look for? Well, you can add query parameters, which I haven't really mentioned yet. Query parameters include the basics. The minimum that you need to provide is an API key. And now, how you pass parameters in an API can involve query parameters, or you can probably post if you need to, but we'll stick with getting here. So when you do a get on a URL resource, you append these query parameters. And this is what a demo one looks like. If I click on this, this is the result. This is an API lookup on NASA's website for the APOD programming interface. It's not glamorous. It's just raw data. I made a query and it gave me the most recent, right? Today's October 20th, APOD image. All the metadata involved with it, including, and it's basically a Python dict. JSON, like I said, its literal syntax maps very well with Python. So I could take this and probably dump it in Python with very little change, if at all. So you can see that one of the keys in this JSON object is HD URL, which is a link to the high definition image. URL is a link to the low res image that they put on the page when you visit it. There's the description, copyright, all the other metadata to make it useful. And if I were to say copy and paste this, for example, I could go and see. Oops, I think I added a quote there. There's the image. I don't know if it's that high res. Doesn't seem to want to zoom anymore. But nonetheless, there it is. There's your image. Now, did I close my, I closed it. Okay, so back to this. How do we use this with Python? That's what I meant to do. Nuggets, where are we going? Hello. I guess I'll start where I left off. So to go from there, we can see we have other query parameters if we wish to pull selected data from the database, not just the default, which is the current day's image. Not a whole lot to this API. It's a very basic API. So we can query for a date, says, give me the APOD image for a particular day, retrieve the URL for the high resolution image is true or false. I'm not even sure why this is a thing. It's just an added attribute. It's not, I don't know. Usually I just say true. And of course the API key, which you need to make a successful query. This is your license, so to speak, to use the service. We're going to use the demo key by default. And that'll be fine for what we're doing today. Very limited, but it'll be fine. So let's take a look what we can do in Python to make this happen. This is ripped out from another script I wrote that actually takes a random astronomy picture of the day of a threshold resolution, and it puts it on my desktop, makes it my desktop background. So I just pulled out the relevant parts that make this work for today. And you can see, in order to make this work, I needed several different libraries to import. Packages, time, requests, which is a third-party package. In fact, pip3 install requests, just get that in. Let that run. JSON module, which is built in, date, time, and random, all built-in modules. So really the only external one we're worrying about here is requests, which honestly should be built in. It's so good. I don't know why it's not already built into the standard library of Python. So here we have only two functions. And I'll be honest with you, I don't remember why I wrote this separate construct URL function. And clearly I'm flipping parameters around for some reason, and I don't remember why. Just pretend it's there for a reason, and we don't have to worry about why it works. And this mess is a lot of exception handling that may or may not be needed, but the basics are here. I want to make a query to NASA's APOD API, their web-based programming interface for the astronomy picture of the day. And that's the URL for it. That's the link. And in order to pick a random year, I get today's date for some reason, right? Yeah, I get today's date and I do a rand range. So I pick a random number between 1997 and this year plus 1, because you know how rand range works. Just like range, you have to go one past if you want to include the stop. Then for month and day, I just, even though not a whole lot of consideration for the different months in the day, days in a month, right? So I just say 31. So February you may get a February 31 once in a while, but it's not a big deal. It'll be an error and it'll move on. So I keep it simple here. I pick a random set of year, month, and day. I put it together as a date parameter. If you remember over here, the date parameter is in the form of year, month, and day. 4-digit year, 2-digit month, and 2-digit day. And that's what I do here. I put that together. Then I take URL parameters, which already contain, it's a list of tuples, which you can really consider to be sort of a flattened out dictionary. And we have API key, which is demo key, as we saw, and we said HD to be true. These are going to be the default all the time. And all I do is append to that list a new tuple of the date. There's the date string indicating the parameter, and of course the date itself that I want to look for. And then whatever that construct URL function does, who knows, but regardless, I get out of this APOD URL. And I begin the process, I print it out, and then I grab it. Request is very, very simple. Import the request module and tell it to get. And out of it, you get a response. In that response object, you need to introspect depending on exactly what you're doing. You may want to get text, there's JSON output, all sorts of things. In fact, I don't even need this. I can actually say response.json, and that should work. I believe it's an attribute, not a method. So we'll see if that works. Let's try it out. Date is not defined. What did I screw up? Nope, I forgot to do this. Okay. So first things first. Oh, it is a method. Let's stop it. There you go. My code just contacted NASA, grabbed this image, rather it queried for this image. This is an API call. Demo key, HD true, and it selected the date of 2002, July 30th, which happens to be the star clusters and some, doesn't say, probably somewhere it said where it is. Star cluster swarm is just about clusters. It must be a visualization. But we can look at the image, if it'll let me copy and paste. So I didn't optimize it for quick linking, and it's a GIF, so I'm guessing it's animated. There you go. Yeah, it's just an n-body simulation of clusters. What do they call it? The virial theorem, I think it is, for globular clusters. Now, you can see going forward other things that are made. So I query for 2004, 2006, 2010, and you get all sorts of different stuff. And eventually I'm going to overdo my quota of queries using the demo key. But this is a use of an already existing, well-defined, and simple web API. So do you have any questions on this before I go on? Okay. So let's get this out of the way. We know how to use one now. Some of the tools are already built in. The only one I do recommend you put in on your own from external sources is requests, and it is installed, so we're good. And actually, I do want to keep my, how do we want to do this? We'll do this over here. So now let's build our own simple little thing. Install. Okay. Oh, actually, go back to my slides before we continue. So we're going to build a prototype API using, again, obviously Python and Flask. And I found an example involving a distant reading archive. I don't know why they phrased it that way. I don't know what that means, but it's just going to be a simple book catalog. We're not going to have a database. We're just going to have a few sample entries to prove that this works. And it's going to involve standard bibliographic entry, including like the first line of this particular book, etc., or books, a few books. So just to give us an idea how this works. And we'll build a basic Flask application. And this is going to be using only the bare, the standard Flask install. And as you well know, Python has tons of web-based frameworks that we could use. And Flask is great because it is simple, it's bare bones. I spent a lot of time with it, so that's the one I like to use. Django is great, but it is a kitchen sink version of a web framework. Everything's built in, so to speak. I mean, you got lots of, you have a very powerful administrative interface, a lot of capability built in, ready to go. It's more than we need here. Flask gives us that minimalist approach we'll appreciate. In addition, using Flask and that minimalistic start, as I mentioned, we're going to use REST, and that means we have to structure our API logically. So let's look at how NASA structured their API real quick. That's one thing we didn't look at. NASA APIs. API nasa.gov/planetary/apod. I think that's pretty reasonable, but there is no verb in there. There's no gets or sets or deletes or puts or moves or anything like that. Everything here is state about what you're looking for. I want to get this particular date, or attributes, I should say, right? And then, true and so forth. And that means if we want to use REST, the HTTP post, get, put, and delete methods that happen when a browser or a web client make requests of a certain type will be the basis of how a REST API operates. So we'll definitely do get stuff today. I do have an example that I hope to show at least with just looking at the code that involves putting, so we can actually change code and how that works. Now, this is supposed to map somewhat to your CRUD, your database operations: create, read, update, and delete. So that's, somebody had this about 20 years ago as their PhD thesis, this REST methodology. There's a whole paper. There are websites devoted to explaining the web API, the REST API stuff. Two of those links I include in here that looked reasonably decent. So HTTP requests are going to be integral to how this all works. Now, for example, I'm no expert in this. I'm just showing you what I've learned, and if someone can correct me, I'm happy to take corrections. But if you're going to have an HTTP request which returns all books provided in our sample data, but here's one, we'll have that, I guess. But we're going to say, look at this poorly designed example of an API endpoint. To you, it looks good. Maybe. To me, it looks reasonable at first. api.example.com/getbook10. Speaks to you, speaks to me, seems reasonable, but this violates the basic REST style. The idea here is that your verbs, anything involving what you're doing with that resource, are done by the protocol itself in HTTP. So it shouldn't need to show up in the URL. It's extraneous and it gets in the way. And the additional problem here, it's get book. If you are trying to access a resource, a singular resource like book 10, the collection resource before that should be books, plural, or users, or whatever plurality you need to use as you, in the hierarchy, descend down from collection to singular. We got another chat. So I got a question from Ryan. When you get a chance, can you suggest an inexpensive way to put authentication and limits on an API I would create and secure? That's a very good question. I hadn't put that into the talk for today, but we can maybe do some quick searching and I can hopefully get you on the right path for that.
Thanks, Richard. Much appreciated.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sure. So a better way to write that URL would be something like, again, apiexample.com/books/10, which would be book number 10, let's say. You're referenced by some sort of basic index. Or ID, I guess, a better way to say it. And this is a common but maybe inflexible approach. You may see this all the time with various websites you visit, where you start seeing all these very clear resource IDs for things you're working with. But what if you want to filter more generally? Well, you might be able to say on the books collection, the books resource on this REST URL, we can add query parameters. So rather than /10 to get one single item, book 10 of ID 10, whatever that book may be, we then instead query an author and add in publish date and so forth, and particular output preferences, not unlike what we did here. Query apod. I guess there is no plurality of apod, it's just apod. But nonetheless, we provide query parameters to pull in some specifics. In this case, it does pull out one thing, but I don't know if you can do a date range with this or not. I haven't tried that. I've only wanted to use this to pull out one image. But it doesn't change the point. The point is you can put queries and use that to get a broader selection of data. Okay. But also how you construct your URLs can help you grow for future use. So we have just books, but what if you have other types of resources you wish to serve later on? What about videos, movies, TV shows? So instead of just /books, maybe you want /resources /books /TV whatever, music. Again, kind of like NASA, API nasa.gov /planetary /apod. I'm not sure what the planetary necessarily means because apod is not just planetary, it's basically universe, but they have a reason for categorizing apod under the planetary resource. Okay. And this looks just like this one we did here, right? API books 10, but we just added resources before books, which is categorizing it a little better to allow us to expand potentially in the future for other stuff. And you may also want to consider versioning. You may see this every once in a while for API documentation for, who knows, like Google or whatever sites you like to use APIs against, and they may version their APIs. So that way they can work on newer and better ways to access their data and resources without deprecating and breaking the old stuff. Well, they'll deprecate it, but they won't break the old stuff immediately. They'll let you use it. And then once their new versions are better, then they'll say, hey, it's time to move over. And hey, this is our sunset date for this, and so on. So in the end, you may want to start developing this sort of structuring. Okay, well, this is the end of the slides, but I mean, we're just going to go to the terminal and text editor at this point. How are we doing on time? Okay. Any questions thus far? Great. Okay. So I am, if you're having trouble seeing this stuff, let me know. I'm just going to expand this. Let's put this together. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to call this. We're in source. I'll just call it API. MKDIR API. Nothing too fancy. Okay, and then we go into. Okay, I'm going to put that in the API folder. I don't know if there's one true standard way of structuring a Flask application. I have done it so many different ways over the years, and this is just one way this was done. So, and it looks pretty reasonable to me. I think it's compatible with how I've done it in the past. Okay, so I'm inside my directory here, source API. So the API directory, however you make it, the project base for me is source, SRC. Call it whatever you want for yourself. And then I made an API directory, which I'm inside. I'm going to open up a file called API.py. Now you should see a second text editor, in my opinion, a more pleasing color scheme. And we're going to put got a question in the chat. What do we got going on here? Oh, yeah, that's a good point, Josh. So Josh is pointing out that JWT, or sometimes pronounced JOT, is my go-to for API authentication authorization management. Thank you, Josh. So he's got a good start to that. Import Flask. Create the Flask application object. Yeah, it's trying to autocomplete for me to be helpful. And name would be the script name. That's just going to be called API. App.config debug equals true. Okay, this is really getting annoying. I don't need it to be that helpful. App config. Okay. Okay, so next thing so this is just, we'll do a normal landing page for this little app. It's not an API, but just a basic thing. So we'll define this first with a decorator, app.route. This decorates the function I'm about to write with the route that it'll be attached to. In other words, what is the URL of this page? This page is not going to be an HTML file. It's going to be a function that produces HTML data. So the route, in this case, is going to be the root of this website. And the methods this particular resource, the root of the website, supports is only get. That's the only HTTP method it should support. And I define home as the function that will be decorated by the thing above. And we simply return, very simple, non-compliant HTML data. Just dump it on the screen just to make sure we can do something. Distant reading, archive. Okay, and you can do some more. In fact, let's make this, I don't care about how it's formatted. This site is a prototype API for distant reading of science fiction novels. There we go. We use a triple quoted string to make that happen. Okay, and then after this is done, app.run. If this is done correctly, we have a very basic Flask app. So I save it. What do we have going on here? Let me do an ls recursively. Let me go back one level. This is what we're looking at here. Ignore books.py for a minute. That just has some of my sample data. In fact, I'm going to move that into my API directory. So all we have in here is an API directory with api.py, and I just put in books.py, which I'll show you in a minute. I have this pyproject.toml. It is another way. I don't know if I have to read up more on it. It's used by Poetry, the Python dependency tool. That's really slick. But I believe it's based on some PEP 5 something, I believe. The TOML file is a way of describing Python projects and all sorts of stuff regarding it. So I guess there's another way of replacing requirements.txt and setup.py. That's a talk for another day, for someone who knows more about it. Okay, so here we are. We got our little Flask app written. Let's just confirm this part works. So I should be able to just typing this, and we get stuff. Serving Flask app API, lazy loading. So this is the development web server that Flask supports, which is very handy. So now, when you make changes to your source code for this app, Flask will detect it and reload. And therefore, you don't have to quit and start it again. So that's pretty handy. And there's a built-in debugger and stuff like that. But let's get into this new window. There you go. That's our website. Distant Reading Archive. This site is a prototype API for distant reading of science fiction novels. I guess they mean for you to read the whole book. I don't know. Pretty nice. Now, that's not the point, though. While we have a pleasant, easy to read landing page for humans, we need something that is well defined for a computer program to interface with. So next, we need to put in some book info. So let's do this like this here. So I got this data already set to go just to save us a little time. And there's 1, 2, 3 books here. And I am sad to say I have not read either one, any of these books, even though I claim to be a science fiction fan. So I don't know anything about these books. I know Ursula, but other than that, I'm not that well read, I guess. But we're going to need this list of dictionaries. That's 3 dictionaries in this list as part of the data the API will serve. This is in lieu of a database. Right? I'm not going to bother with a database today. So how do we make this work? Okay, let's see. I should be able to say import books. Right, I believe that should be correct. It's not books. I can't remember the relative import. It should be a relative import, right? I'm doing it wrong. Do it like this. From.import books. Unfortunately, the dev server will crash if there's a syntax error. So, oh, it's not a real package. That's why. Okay, well, then let's make it a package. If you want to make it a package, touch thunderinit.py. It's just an empty file. It tells Python that this hierarchy of directories, or in this case, one directory, is part of a package that has multiple files in it. So now this should yeah, I've had this problem before. I always had trouble with relative imports, so I may not do it that way. Attempted relative import with no known parent package. Maybe I need to touch this too. I have no idea. I confess I always screw this relative importing stuff up. Or when in doubt, I'll just import it directly, and then who cares? It's right there. So ignore all the noise and the terminal. And if you're better versed at relative importing, let me know. I've tried practicing with it multiple times over the years. I never get it right. So I'm just importing it. And books works because my script api.py is in the same directory as it. So the Python search, sys.path finds it. So it's not a problem. Okay, so we want to create our first route for our API at app.route. And this will be /API. Come on, go away. V1. So we're designating /API as, well, that this URL structure is going to start off with resources that are accessible through, as an API, I should say, as opposed to serving HTML pages. /API version 1. The resources that we'll be looking at are books, so plurality, resources and books, and then you can say all. I think that's a reasonable way to refer to things. And methods equals get. So we're not going to allow any changes to stuff. We're only going to allow retrieval. Def API all return JSONify the books. Oh, what's JSONify? Where's that pulled in from? It's from Flask. They did this weird. Okay, from Flask import request JSONify. Okay. So I assume JSONify is nothing more than the Flask version of the JSON modules, JSON.load_s, right? No, dump s, to JSONify a Python object. And I don't know what other particulars are involved in there, but at least it's a nice name. So it's an easy to remember name. So we're feeding up books, but in my case, it's not just books. My module is called books, and the list within it's called books. So that's what we're JSONifying. And we run. Okay, so now we have two things. We have our distant reading archive landing page, and now we need to be able to go and get all the books. So let's see here, and it's 5,000, okay. And this is what the URL structure looks like. And that's what it dumps. So localhost, port 5000. It could be something.com. Who cares? It's a server at some port. And the point is you're accessing through HTTP these resources. And if you want to see what that looks like, go to inspect element, which I believe is named the same in all three major browsers. And you can bring up the dev tools. In this case, network. I use this a lot. And you can see that I'm making a query. There's a lot of technical info here. And I prefer Firefox's form of this, but this will have to do. Here we go. I mean, Apple's pretty good with it, but summary of the request is here, but let's look at the request in detail. Get, there's the get. We're making an HTTP GET request. Get this resource. And these are all nouns, and that involves no verby action. There's no gets or sets here because the action itself is part of the protocol. And everything else is just part of the protocol's connection info. User agent, language, capabilities, etc. And the response, in this case from Flask, and specifically here, content type, is of the type application JSON. So the JSONify, that's what it must be doing. It must be creating a proper response object that sets the content type correctly. So it's not, oh, geez. Someone fell downstairs, felt like. So it does this correctly so that you have a proper JSON MIME type that's set. Here we are. So it loads it up. We're looking at it. And what do we do with it? Well, it's not particularly useful by itself, right? I mean, this is just Safari's kind enough to show it to us. So maybe in a minute we can write a little program to connect to our little web server and get this data. Let's see what else we can add to this. Let's add the ability to get a specific resource rather than all of them. Okay, let's leave this open. Let's come back here. At app route. Now our API path for this is still going to be /API /v1/resources /books plural, and we are going to take query parameters here. And we could do this as a resource, like /10, but it looks like we're doing this with arguments, query parameters. Right? Let me take a look. Yeah, that's the case. We can do it both ways. Maybe I prefer having the ID number, but maybe somebody with better versed in this can tell me which one's better. I personally like having the ID number. But let's do it this way first. Okay. Methods equals get. There you go. So this decorates the function I'm about to write below, called def API ID, which should be better said as a book ID. You probably should have a doc string. Check if an ID was provided as part of the URL. If ID is provided, assign it to a variable. If no ID is provided, display an error in the browser. Right? There is no specified collection. I mean, I guess you can make it implied instead of all. Maybe if you just went to books, maybe that would give you all of them. See, there's various ways you can structure and consider how you want to set this up, but this is one way we're doing it. Browser. We got extra space here. If the string ID in request.args so every request object that gets passed around, and there's a request object that is, you can see right here, is it? We bring it in from the Flask module. So every request that gets made, we can introspect it, look at its key here. Is ID a key in this? In other words, were there any arguments provided? And you'll see what I mean by arguments in a minute. If so, that means we have an ID. We can't use ID because it's a function. Int requests.args ID. We'll just give it a smaller name. Keep things neat. Otherwise, if there is no ID argument provided, we're trying to access this resource, but provide not all nor any ID, then we have a problem. And then we need to produce an error message. And that is as simple as return a string or HTML. So, whatever you need here, we'll return a string. Because this isn't an HTML page. It should be a JSON result, actually. So this actually shouldn't just be a string. I believe this should be a JSON object. Please specify an ID. Okay. Now, if we get past that point and our code is continuing, then we create an empty list of our results. And now we loop for every book in books. Now it's books.books. That's the way. Jeez, that's too many books. Let's call this. Is it Libre? Is that library or book? I don't know. Or does that just mean free? It means free. How about Latin for book? Anybody know Latin? Liber. There's my pronunciation. That way I don't have to see so many books. Now, if Liber ID is equal to the ID we're looking for. In other words, we're just searching through the list and matching until we find it. And if we find the ID we're looking for, we results.append book. Now, this doesn't break. If this were me, I'd probably break right here. Why continue searching? I mean, there's only going to be, you're searching by ID, so the presumption is you have unique IDs. I don't see why you would have multiple IDs for a book. That wouldn't make sense. So I would break and say we found the one and only result. Happy day, and you're done. We back a little bit, and then we return, and we JSONify our results. Our Python list gets converted into a Python or a request, a JSON object. JSONify results. Okay, now we have our second API call, which now we will copy from here, open up a new tab, and delete all, and we'll put question mark ID, oh gosh, well, 0, I think would make sense, right? Something broke. Expected indented block. I must have broke something accidentally. Let's see if it's still broken. There you go. Aha. I accidentally broke it, but it's a great opportunity to see that Flask has a nice built-in debugger. You can go down to where it broke. You can see a broken API ID, or function here. And it broke right here, requests.args. That's because it's request singular and not plural. I was confusing it subconsciously with the requests module for web access, web requests. Fix that. I should be able to reload. Book is not defined because I made another mistake. I called it Lieber. Fix that. Off I go. Now I've looked up one particular book. Go to 1, I got Ursula Le Guin. Then I get 2, Samuel Delaney. And then there's no 3, and that gets us an empty list. I guess that makes sense. I'd much rather give me a null result rather than a particular error. Though you could use HTTP error codes to signify that you haven't found something like 409 or something like that. Now, any questions so far?
No, thank you. Continue.
Okay, great. Thank you. What else can we do here? Field. Okay, so that's the basics of it. And we've gone quite far with this so far. And as I said, unfortunately, I'm not going to connect up with databases. If you know enough about databases and incorporating them, it's really not that big of a jump, right? So instead of, for example, doing a goofy little for loop here, you would do a query into the database for a particular ID or whatever query you're basing on and get a result set from that. And that's what you return, right? So just replace that part there with database.
Yeah, Richard, it's better without the database because it allows us to focus on the connectivity.
Good, because I suck at databases, so I appreciate that.
No, it's what I have to do when I work on databases. Like I have to use some fairly large ones.
Yeah.
And the initial versions don't do the connection. They run into a function that, okay, I'll send you something that looks like data.
Yeah. So you just sort of mock it up a little bit, right?
Yeah, because if you can't make it work simple, you ain't making it work complicated.
Good point. Yep. Yeah, good. Okay, so we're all on the same page then. I appreciate that. I don't want to feel like I'm shortchanging people. Now, let's connect this up on our end as a client. We want to write a little program to talk to it. So we can go here. Where do I want to do this? Let's do this piecemeal. Let's look for singular books and let's make a new notebook. Hello? Did you make a new notebook? It's apparently not happy. Okay, that's fine. It's fine time to fail. There we go. What the heck? Oh, it just took a minute. Okay. So here we're going to say this remote library client. We'll keep this pretty simple. We'll import requests. And we'll probably want, and import JSON. We'll probably need some other stuff. We'll get to it. I'll just write a simple main function. I don't need anything that fancy. Library URL. And we'll just make it a little complicated for complicated sake. I mean, you could break this up in different components and construct the URL string separately, or just do it all at once, whatever suits you. And if I just simply say request equals requests.get, that's our HTTP method, library URL, and then print request, this is our first go at it, and we get a request object. In particular, the response is its default repr, and it's ID 200. So successful. That's great. Was it? It actually shouldn't be successful. We didn't return. So we have some shortcomings here. This error message, I didn't do all, did I? No, just books. We return an error string. So here's a good question here. How do we return an error response object? Let's do this here. Flask, because I don't remember. Return error code. API exceptions. Oh, I don't want to make an actual class. I don't need an actual. We can do this simply, right? I just want to return a code. This must be an easy way to do it. Oh, render template. I don't want to render a template. I want to render a string. Oh, tuple. So I might be able to just say, hey, return, server error or something like that. 409. I don't care what. Done. Okay, so what I did was give it the object I'm returning, in this case, a simple string, and then the second item in this return tuple, the error code. And someone probably said it in the chat. Nope. Evan's got a question. What is the best method of posting a lot of data to an interactive plot on an HTML page, like using Bokeh? That's a good question. I'd have to see where the data is coming from. And Bokeh is web-based? Is that how it displays the plots? I can't remember. I've only used matplotlib, really. But you bring it up after we're done, and maybe you can show us, and those experts in the group can help us out with that. But that's a great question. Yeah, good question. One I don't have an answer for immediately. Okay, so 500. Now we know we have an error message here. Okay, request.text. So I print the text that's part of the request object that I got from the website. So we know something's working here. You can just print request and the request text. You can see that whatever you need to see. This is for us to understand what it's doing. Great. Now let's go through while. Oh no, stay on. What the hell happened? This is what happens. You try to substitute a real text editor in a browser. It doesn't make any sense. While rec dot, is it code? It's return. I don't know. Can't remember what it is. Print rec.json. Let's see what we can do here. And we'll just do our own counting. I mean, I can do this in a for loop and break the for loop, but we're just going to do it this way. You make your initial request, ID 0, and you want to maybe append library URL equals library URL plus question mark. What did you say? What was ID? Yeah, ID. ID
You're gonna want a second variable there. You're gonna want a base library URL. Otherwise, you're just gonna keep appending to it.
Yes. Thank you, Josh. Baser. It makes a lot of sense. Boom. What? You don't like to compound your strings over and over? A rookie mistake. Now we'll say choose your flavor of string formatting. I prefer string interpolation in most cases.
String interpolation is the best.
Oh, it's nice. It's so nice. It took me that long. And that should do it. I don't know. Yeah, I figured it wasn't code. Response? Maybe it's response. I can't remember. This is why documentation is so important. It's just called return code. Someone knows off the top of their head, let me know. Status code. Request read the docs. Brace for status. Okay. Yep. Under status underscore code. So we just change. And I have a problem here. Woo! Runs forever. I made another rookie mistake, didn't I? I'm betting most of you out there already know. Oh, Daniel.
Infinite loop.
You got an infinite loop. Indeed. Fixed. Oh, no.
You're not
because I'm not requesting again. Son of a gun. It's like I never programmed before, man.
It's the curse of the demo.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, let's try this again.
You got to reset the. There you go. You got to do set the library URL again.
Ooh, let's see here. Right? I did that right.
Copy line 5 and put it after your increment.
Line 5 and put it after.
And put it in between line 9 and 10.
Oh, duh. Jeez. My God. Oh, my goodness. I'm glad you're here, Josh. Thank you so much. You think I teach this for a living?
I can critique everybody.
Okay. So we don't have an error message. So it still goes on forever. So we have, I think, maybe a failing. Maybe not. So maybe searching and stopping based on status code is not what we want to do. Maybe we want to say while rec.json does not equal. Let's print out the JSON. It's going to be right. Does it return
Or the list of an empty list.
Yeah, because
So
JSON returns a Python object, right?
I think so.
It does. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Because the JSON dumps, or rather loads, the JSON string response and turns into a Python object. Deserializes it in effect. So here we go. And let's print out a little extra space there just for fun. And we're done. And I just print the final response. We don't need that there. Okay. It's a little touch and go, but I think we have a client that talks to our remote library and does stuff. Now, what can you do with this? Well, whatever you need. The data is at your fingertips now. And in this case, I'm enumerating each of these books one by ID. Now, if Python had a post-test loop instead of a pre-test loop, I wouldn't have to do this funky business of, priming the loop first and then doing all this. I always hate that. I guess I could do it with a bottom if statement there. Questions on this? Let's bring this back up here. Okay, so I think we have enough. It's already 8:22, so I think we're in a pretty good spot. If there's anything else I can show, let me show you some other options for API development, and we might have some questions. And I think folks have been answering other people's questions here. Evan's asking, the difficulty I had was deciding to either transfer my data from my Flask API versus the typical methods, or trying to launch Boca's server and tie it into the Flask API. Each user update on the page requested a mass of data again. Well, I mean, it's a design decision. I would need to see the particulars of it. I mean, all of us would need to, I'm sure, to give you some sound advice. So you have an existing Flask API for something, is what you're saying. I would say, oh, you're welcome, Phil. Yeah. Evan, that might be a cool thing to demo if you want to demo that. It's quite apropos for today's topic. I don't know if you feel comfortable showing it off, but I would say your API is probably a nice bet if that's where you're storing all your data. Unless you want to make, well, I haven't used Boca, so I don't quite know the particulars of Boca to be able to. Did someone look like someone else responded to you, Daniel? Okay. What else we got here? We have. What did I have? Let's open up this one. So this is not a full-fledged demo because I don't have the hardware this worked with. But this belonged to a box. It was a signal digitizer. It's a 2-channel signal digitizer for scientific instrumentation that I had worked on at one point. And I wanted to put onto this box. It was basically a BeagleBone with some custom embedded hardware. So it was running Linux, and I wanted to put a very basic REST-based API so that a web interface could communicate with it and produce, some pretty display of data. This box was filled with various parameters. A lot of them could be introspected for their current state, and a lot of them could also be tuned and changed to different values in order to change how the box operates. Now, there's stuff here that are not relevant to today's discussion, such as the communication from my API server to the box itself, was using another protocol called ZMQ. I'm not discussing ZMQ today. However, I want you to notice that there's an addition to this code that had not been discussed. And, Evan, is that a question to me, Evan? Are you familiar with the hidden attribute in HTML? Yeah, I believe I am. And so in this case here, this is a Flask app still. And we wrote a class called instrument and subclassed it off of something called resource. And you can look at my imports above to see where I'm going with this. And in here, I defined 2 methods, get and put. I could define more, but these happen to be the 2 REST style verbs I wanted to implement, getting and putting. And there's more here than we really need to discuss, but I just want to show you that you can design a Flask-based REST API with not official library, but a library designed specifically for guiding you in that direction. And that module is called Flask RESTful. And let me take you there. And there's a whole lot here to look up. All right, so if we did say a quick start, we can build a minimal API with this alone. So maybe let's do this and get a feel for what this is doing. And maybe we can, I don't want to go too much longer. So let me get rid of, we might come back to this book one. Maybe this book one we can adapt, but let's at least write the basic one they do on the website. So this code I had from before was a way for me to communicate with a device that had a raw protocol that was based on ZMQ and wrapped it around a nice web-based, REST-based interface. And you can see in the class I defined, and there's no There are no decorators, right? Yeah, I don't remember any decorators. And the API is distinguished by the fact we have a class, subclass from resource, and our methods are named after the actions that they support. And then we add the resource to our set of URLs that we allow. We say that the class instrument, which supports put and get, is mapped to /femto object, which object would be some parameter that's dynamic. Could be, you know, foo, bar, spam, who cares? Could be whatever. And then that object has some attributes to it that can be changed. So my hierarchy for this was /femto, which is the name of the box, / some parameter name, / what that parameter attribute, it's not parameter name, component name, I believe it was, an attribute of that component. And then to change the value of that attribute, I would use the put method, this here, to change it. And that's not well shown here, so it's not worth it to get too far into it. Anyways, it was one of the first ones I wrote. So let's go to this real quick, and let me install Flask RESTful. Let me kill this. And most of the prerequisites are already installed because it's obviously based on Flask. Workzug, it's like a Germany name I can't pronounce. Click, markup safe, Jinja 2 is a templating engine. Lots of stuff in here that the author of Flask had created on his own. And let's take this and we'll just type it up and dissect it as we go through. So how we're going to do this. Let's call this what do I want to call it? Let's just get this out of the way for now. I'll call it the Astonishing API 2. From Flask, import Flask. From Flask RESTful, import resource, which we've talked about already, and this API object. If you remember, there's an app object you create for every Flask application. Here, not only do you create that app object, app equals Flask and the script name, but we also create an API object based off of the app. So we pass the app object, the Flask app object into that, and now you have an API object. Our first step, that class, mine was called instrument. Here, it's called hello world. Subclassed off of resource. And the only thing it supports is get, self, return, and it returns a JSON payload, hello world. I'm suspecting, since this is part of Flask RESTful's constructs here, it's probably going to JSONify that and set the resource type, the MIME type correctly. And all that. We can verify it. Then we say API, add resource, and say that hello world will be the controller, the class attached to the root of this website. Now you should be able to mix in here a normal Flask application along with any API stuff, but this is probably going to be a pure API server. Okay, app.run, debug equals true. Do I need debug true here? Oh, come on. I'm just trying to be too helpful. Very simple app. And I should be able just to say API 2. Okay. Now this is running on the same port that I was running my distant reading archive on. And there's hello world. Okay, great. Do folks want to see me maybe convert the first API example to this? We're already 8:32, so we're headed towards. We're already an hour and a half in.
If we have the time, that would be good. Richard,
Yes.
what IDE are you using? Is that Visual Studio Code? Which IDE is that?
I'm sorry. I can't hear you very well. I apologize.
Which IDE are you using,
Oh.
please? Is that VSE?
Yeah, I'm just using Vim actually. Are you familiar with Vim?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm
good.
on Windows, so I probably wouldn't have Vim.
Yeah. I'm pretty bare bones. I don't know if it's bare bones. I'm pretty traditional, I
Minimalistic.
suppose.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have a Mac version of Vim called Mac Vim, and it I have a whole bunch of extension. Whoa. Hey, someone found the markup, the annotate feature. Can we clear that out? Clear that. There we go. That's interesting. I don't think I'm running the meeting. Okay, let's try that. Oh, thank you. So I'll see if we can convert it then. Let's see if we can make that happen. So with this in mind, let me see if I can just copy api.py to api old.py. Poor man's version control, I suppose. And then we'll just open this up. So my Vim has a lot of extensions for linting and syntax checking and style checking, like Flake8 and I forgot the heck, what's it called? Oh, I forgot the name of the thing. But there's a Vim extension that does all sorts of code stuff. The helping, the linting and the style checking, not only for Python, but for other languages. And I wish I could remember off the top of my head what the heck it was called. Bundle, what's it called? Oh, the autocomplete stuff is Jedi. It sometimes gets annoying. Vim 1. Ale. Yeah, it's called Ale. It's got a weird name. No wonder I didn't remember it. Syntastic. Yeah, that sounds familiar. I think I've tried Syntastic one time, a long time ago. But Ale is the one I'm using. But thank you for the suggestion. All right, let's try this out. So this is a copy of our original one. I want to import, right, Flask RESTful and bring in the resource API. And we want to make an API object. And we said debug true up here rather than as a parameter to run. So I guess you can do it either way. Now, I could leave this route alone. This is producing HTML. There's no need to make this into a separate class. I think I'm happy with that. What can we do? Class library, subclass from resource. And the idea was that we have def get self. And their example is so simple, it doesn't include parameters, resource for routing. Here we go. They have one here that involves a to-do list. Parameters are passed in. You can see how you can type annotate, right? String, I'm assuming that's an annotation. To-do ID. So maybe we could follow this example. Get. So maybe we'll do something simple like get all. And return books.books. I think it's smart enough to handle that. But we need to attach it. So API.add resource library. And this is where we put our API path here. And I think we can get rid of that for now. So this should be really simple if I did this correctly. We have no parameters to pass in, and let's make it work. Oh, and this shows off how you can use curl. So if you're familiar with the curl command line utility, you can use that to look at to query not only web pages but also APIs really nicely. It's pretty well designed for it. You can provide it all the things you need, including, like in this example, we want to make a to-do list with this API. We can tell it to put. So put is to so there's a distinction, a semantic distinction between put and post. I think put updates, I believe, rather than creates. That could be wrong. Maybe it's the other way around.
Richard, I typically am using Postman to test my APIs.
Yeah, Postman. There's a few others. Let's see here. I don't have Postman on this machine, but Postman's a great suggestion, indeed. And that's it's an app designed to let you construct all your queries, including all the metadata like your headers, authorization tokens, and whatever you need in order to test your APIs.
Yeah. There's a tutorial, a set of tutorial videos and how to use it and what to do to use it available over on YouTube.
Postman beginner tutorial. Yeah, there it is. Cool logo. So I do recommend it. There are a couple others for the Mac that look pretty nice, but I think Postman is cross-platform. So whether you care about a nice Mac interface or something that's generalized for multiple platforms, whatever your preference is.
I usually have to code for 6 platforms, so I try to keep it as multi-platform as possible.
Well, it makes sense, right? It is a web API after all, right? So that means we're dealing with all sorts of disparate environments.
It's platform and it's free, so that tends to work at many companies.
I'm sorry. Was it?
It's cross-platform and it's free, so that many companies tend to use that.
And I thought it was an extension, a web extension at one point, wasn't it?
There was a web extension. There still is, but the preference is to use the desktop tool, and I believe it's an Electron-based app, so built with HTML and CSS.
That's correct. I believe that they actually depreciated the extension.
Yes.
Okay. Because I feel like I used the extension years ago briefly, and then when I downloaded it again not too long ago, I was like, oh, I don't remember it being standalone. But yeah, Postman. So Tim is providing correction. Post is typically for create. There you go. So I had it. I can't remember what I said. I said both in order to cover my bases. So post is typically for create operations. The entire entity must be supplied. Put is for updates, and typically the entire entity is supplied. And then patch is for updates where only the data to be changed is supplied. Yeah, patch is one of those HTTP verbs too, and he just explained what it does in this case. Thank you, Tim. Very much appreciate that. It's very helpful because I can't remember this stuff. I'm supposed to be talking about it. Let's get this done. Let's see if this even works. Now we go back here, Python 3 API.py, and nothing's blowing up yet. Okay, and then I should be able to go to here. I should get a normal web page like before. Yep, that was our old API server or original API server. This is all. Yeah, worked fine. Something changed, maybe just formatted it differently, but the data is the same. So we have a working API using the Flask RESTful plugin or package. Now, what if I wanted to change the API ID one and have it handle not only all books, but where's the tutorial? Specific books, right? We can do a to-do ID. So we said put was for an update, right? Is that what Tim said? Put is for an update and post is for create. So we have a get and put. For some reason, they're assuming that would make sense if you are updating a dictionary. I suppose you're updating what's there and with the entirety of the data that's passed in.
Could I tell you a trick I normally use, Richard, if you have enough time?
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
My background is used to be a lot of database, so everybody knows CRUD, create, read, update, delete.
Mhm.
So the way I learned it was to peg the HTTP verbs onto that. So the retrieve is the same kind of like get.
Mhm.
So the R maps to the G, the delete maps to the delete, obviously.
Mhm.
And then the other two left will be post and put, and of course PUT. So P update.
I like that. Okay.
And then the other one left is just create, right? So
Mhm.
you create a job at the post office. That's the way I force myself to learn it. That helps anybody.
I like it. Okay. I appreciate that. Thanks. That's helpful. I like that. The put with updates.
Welcome.
Yeah, it's yeah, thanks. It's looks like Tim's got something else here. Well, okay, so Tim is
I
saying
guess it's just distinction between put and patch is probably more the distinction there from what their site is saying. But post can be for other things besides updating,
okay.
or for
Yeah.
inserting or whatever.
Okay. Yeah,
Like,
see, there's
post can be for logging on, where you're submitting data that's going to change a state, but it's not necessarily like adding to your database or something.
mm-hmm.
Whereas put is.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So you got that from the MDN site. Is that a direct quote? The post method is used to submit an entity?
Yeah, it's just copied and pasted.
Okay. No, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. So often causing a change in state or side effects in the server, and put replaces all current representations of the target resource with a request payload. Yeah. Is used to submit an entity, and this replaces all current representations. Yeah, so that's the update, as it was mentioned, and then post. Okay. So can we mimic this here? Can I do this in like 10 minutes? Let's see. So if I were to look at my other example, I had this working. Where the hell did I put it? I did some attributes for this. So what did I do? Object. So I mapped like this. Okay. So I could say, maybe we could simplify it. Instead of /all, if you just access books, you get all of them as the default. I don't mind that. I don't know if that's correct. And I don't know if you need the slash at the end or not. I'm going to leave it there. I don't think it matters. And I save this and retry it. This is fine. This fails because all is no longer there, but just books is there. You can see the whole collection. You know, if I add into this parameter of ID, I can now break it down like I did here. You can see I have, let me put an underscore in that. Oh, that's going to affect, no, it won't affect it. And you can add this as a set of resources that it will respond to. So not only will it respond to this, but I also need it to respond to the collection of books. So we need both of these in here. So let's make this a multi-line. Okay, and then we'll add this in here. Okay, put a comma there. So it'll respond to both forms of URL here. And the ID should be the parameter we're passing in, as you can see with my example here. And we can give it default states. I can just say like none, for example. So if I say if ID, then we just return books.books at that particular ID. I have to convert it to an int, I think, first. Although there was some hint that there was typecasting, but I'm just going to convert it for the sake of brevity here. Else If it's not ID, I mean, it's just return all the books. Did that make sense? I sure hope so. And what did I do here? Oh yeah, so we that's not how our books are organized, are they? Right? The ID is in, it's not the position in the list, although it happens to be. It may not be the position in the list. So there's no guarantee. So we do need to loop over the contents of the list just to be safe. Okay, so then if ID search for it. It should find it. We're not going to worry about errors in the case it does. If it doesn't find it, and return results. You know, it's just simple enough to make this work. Are we running? Yes. Is this going to work? Let's find out. This still works. This still works. And this one, hey, it returns everything. It's not, oh, because we did it wrong. So it's ignoring the query parameter now. So if I just put 1, results is not defined. Ooh, so that's line 24 because I never could create results. There is no book 1. That can't be right. And, oh, because I'm looking for, I have to convert it to an int. It's kind of inefficient to convert it continually, but whatever. There we go. So we got this operating under the Flask thing, the Flask RESTful package. And I can delete the rest of this. And you can see, to me, it's actually quite simple compared to what we had earlier. There's a lot missing. You know, there's all sorts of validation and checking and this and that. And certainly there's no post. We should be able to post. We have time for post. Post. And let's try post. So what can we do with post? And look at my example from here. I'm not post, but put. We want to update. Maybe I don't want to add a book because I don't have enough to do that with. But put, again, we have parameters. And if I use the put verb with HTTP on these same URL endpoints, I can do updates. But in this case, we want to be careful. We don't want to update all the books. That's not a thing to do as far as I know. I haven't thought about doing that. But I want to update an individual book. So if ID, default is none, and we're trying to put, we need to make sure if ID is a non-empty string. And, well, what are we updating with, right? We need stuff to update with. So not only that, we have to provide, gosh, I don't know, first sentence. What can we add to this? Yeah, I don't know what's a good, maybe just change ID for the fun of it, just to show we can change something. I don't want to get too complicated and messing up. Okay, if ID, then I could say, we do sort of do the same thing again with a little twist. Results, don't care about results. I do care about searching. Leave her in books.books, find the ID of the book we want, and we're not going to append anything, but rather we want to update. But what are we going to update with? We not only are we looking for a particular ID, we need something we want to update it with. How about new ID? How is that provided? As you can see here with my example with put, I have object, attribute, and attribute. How are those given? Well, the attribute themselves aren't the data that's being changed. It's the object that's being changed. And we have to get the JSON from that request to do that. So that's part of the request with put. So there's a whole lot we can do here. Let's say ID is the first thing we can do. And maybe I don't set it to none. I'm sort of guessing along the way here, folks. I haven't done this before in this sense. Okay, so we're not returning anything. We find the ID we want. If it matches, then liber ID is equal to int new ID. And supposedly I've just updated the book's ID number, let's say. But how do we get this to there? And I broke something probably. Yep. Default. Oh, another rookie mistake. Let's just say none for that. No, that's dangerous. No ID. So the ID number is provided in the URL, so that should be a keyword argument. I think that should be fine. Can I just do this? Is that going to be okay? I don't have a default value for a new ID. I don't want it to have a default value. I guess none, but yeah. Let's try that. Okay, so now one thing it showed you they can do here is curl, right? You could put with curl, and it said data, remember the milk. Oh, let's try. If I had Postman, I suppose I could use Postman for this. And we want to go to right API v1 resources books book 1, and then we want to update. Where are we going to replace this? So data equals, we want new ID equals. Should be yeah. I don't know. Put missing one required positional argument, new ID. Or didn't provide enough. Why didn't I provide enough? No, I call it new data. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to figure this out. Like I said, I only did this once, and that was a couple years ago, and I can't remember how I did it. If somebody knows how to do it, let me know. It's already becoming a bit of a mishmash. But I'll leave it up to you guys. And so the data we're passing into here, it says it's missing the positional argument for, let's see, new ID, and it should be failing. Well, here, let me know where it's failing. Because if I can mimic what I did here, I have object and attribute, object, attribute. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, just did this. I don't know, does that help at all? Oh, okay. Int argument must be a string, and not an untype. Makes sense. This is a complete mess, but we'll make it work. No. Ah, does that work? Let's find out. That's working. It's still ID 1. Yeah, she hasn't been updated. So I didn't do something right. So what it should be doing, and let's print it out. Print, what are we getting? ID and new ID. And what the hell? Let's see. Make a curl request. And it prints 1 and -1. Oh, well, that's not helpful. Okay, because it's keyword and I'm providing a default argument. So how I'm not calling curl correctly. And let's take a look at their example because he's not using JSON here. I don't think he's doing, yeah, I'm not doing it right. That's why. I don't think I am. Yeah, data. Oh, he's converting it with the Python version. So he calls it to-do ID, string, and the put is getting form data. That's why he's doing a form request. And curl parse. I don't know. I think that's probably more than we should do today. To do put. Here's the delete task. Add a new task. Post. Yeah, it should be doing books 1 / book /1, and we get the ID of 1 coming through, right? But it's not assigning anything to. I called it new data again. That's why no one caught that. Still not doing it. Okay, whatever. I'm done, folks. It's late and I'm getting tired. And I think we've probably had a good enough introduction to all of this. Are there any final questions before we end? You guys have been very patient. I appreciate it.
No, that's fine. The patch may be the answer to the gentleman's earlier question on how to deal with a large amount of data. If only a small amount of the data is changing, you simply may be able to just patch, update the delta of the data versus updating the entire data file.
Is he updating the data though? Because he sounded like he was trying to retrieve data to plot with Boca. Maybe I didn't get the full story.
No, I haven't done any work with Boca. I do know about the package, and what some people have mentioned, folks have mentioned is why can't you patch it? Of course, if it works, no one says anything. And,
Yeah, right.
I can't tell you if it does work.
Okay, well, there's a suggestion. I'll go with that. Yeah. Great.
Thank you, Rich. This was fabulous.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Very nice.
I learned a lot. Thanks, Rich.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, I'll try to package this up and then we'll put it on GitHub or something.